All right, next up was a very surprising sale. Y'all are going to be shocked by this one. I feel like that could have really gone badly. And what if that had been like a, $250 item? I mean, this was only $16.99. Next up was, to me, a really surprising sale, because this item, to me, like, I would have walked right past it at a garage sale or an estate sale. I would have never known that this had any value. Hi, and welcome to What Sold for December 1st through 7th. If you're new here, my name is Wendy, and in this video, I'm going to go over every item that we sold across multiple different reselling platforms. I'll share with you guys how much we sold the item for, how much we paid for it, and what our profit is. And the profit is how much the buyer paid for the item in total, including any shipping fees that they had, minus our cost of goods, minus any platform fees that we had, and minus our shipping cost to get that item to the buyer. All right, let's dive in. The first item that sold was one of the Christmas Story window clings. We have sold lots and lots of these. We got tons of them on clearance at Big Lots last year, did big quantity listings of them, and have been selling a lot of them. We actually went to Big Lots today to look for more, and they didn't have any. So we had paid $1.35 for this, and this one sold for $13.99. Next up was a 1994 Zelco Itty Bitty Booklight 2-pack of replacement bulbs. This actually sold live while we were recording a What Sold video a couple weeks ago. And this was gifted to us. We didn't have any cost, and it sold for $14.99. Next up was a kid's book called The Jester Has Lost His Jingle by David Saltzman. It was vintage from 1995. This was also gifted to us, and it sold for $14.99. Next up was a vintage 1975 Wallace Berry 3.5-inch orange plaque. It was 3D, and it had a little mouse on it, and it said, "I like you." Kevin found this at a garage sale for 50 cents, and it sold very fast for $14.50. Next up was a set of 6 oblong hammered silver plate napkin rings. They were brand new in the package, and they were marked Hong Kong. We found these in the Goodwill bins for $1.03, and they sold for $24.64 on Etsy. Next up was a Torrid women's plus size pink rose velour dress. We found this at a garage sale for $4, and it sold for $25. Next up was a spirit box. This is a ghost hunting tool. So this is a device that you use a microphone attached to it, and you go around in, anywhere, but ideally a place that's haunted, and you turn it on, and it's supposed to pick up the sounds of ghosts or paranormal activity. We actually tested this item out. This is in an upcoming video as part of our thrifting across Texas. When we went to the Dallas Goodwill bins, we stayed in a haunted hotel in Dallas, and we tested out this spirit box. So you guys stay tuned for that. That's going to be coming out in probably, a couple months or so. So you can see if our spirit box worked or not. It did work in the sense that it made us money. That's for sure, because these things are worth a lot. So we had paid $20 in total for the spirit box, and then a separate microphone that they sold along with it. But we ended up selling those 2 items separately. So I had the spirit box on my spreadsheet at $19, and it sold for $113.97. So that was a good one. I'll take it. Next up was a 100% cashmere full-length men's overcoat by the brand Schneider's of Salzburg. It did have some moth damage on it, but it was a beautiful coat. Kevin found that in the Goodwill bins in South Austin. Like, they had been picked clean. They had pulled the new bins out. Everybody had gone through them. We didn't go up to the new bins. I was actually sitting on the side comping stuff, and we were pretty much done. He was just kind of waiting on me to do some stuff. And while he was waiting on me, he was like, I'll go check that bin that everybody finished going through, and it was just laying there on top. So people had just left it behind, probably because it had holes. I mean, it was clearly marked that it was cashmere. So, you know, people are just looking for different things sometimes, or maybe somebody put it back. You never know. Don't ever think that just because a bin has been gone through that there's nothing in it, because that we have definitely not found that to be the case. So we found that in the bins for $1.03, and it sold for $102.97. And I believe that went to Chile. All right, next up was a 20-pack of something called Wickham's Stick'ems. They were vintage car magnets, and they were reflective. They were in the shape of Christmas light bulbs, and you would magnetically stick them to your car to like decorate your car for Christmas. They were really cute. There were 20 of them, and 10 of them were brand new in the package, and then 10 of them were used in an open package. So we just went ahead and listed them all together. They were gifted to us. We had no cost, and they sold for $13.48. Next up was a 2004 Boss DR880 Dr. Rhythm drum machine instruction book only. Instruction manuals sell great for us. If you are new to our channel and have never watched a video before, I was shocked at how well instruction manuals sell, and across multiple different types of items, but specifically music instruments and medical equipment and, you know, vintage electronics and stuff like that. They sell well. So this was gifted to us, and it sold for $17.18. Next up was a Lego Belleville brown standing replacement dog figure. And we found that in a thrift store toy bag for 22 cents. It sold for $11.84. Next up was a 16-piece lot of Mr. Christmas Stepping Santa or Stepping Mickey replacement light covers and bulbs. We found this in the thrift store for $5.40. It was in a bag, and it had like the entire Stepping Santa product, but I could tell just by looking in the bag that it was totally broken. But Mr. Christmas is definitely a brand to be on the lookout for, and I knew that just the parts alone would be worth paying the $5.40 for, so that's why I bought it. And we stripped it for parts and listed it, and it sold for $40.24. I mean, just the replacement parts sold for that much, and the rest of it we just, ended up having to throw away because it was broken beyond repair. Next up was a 5 DVD lot of blue collar comedy and Ron White and kind of all of that genre of comedy DVDs. These were gifted to us to sell, and they sold for $15. Next up was a lot of 2 Disneyland Little Golden books and records. It included No Such Thing as a Dragon and The Pokey Little Puppy. We found these in the South Austin bins. I was surprised to find the books and the records still together, that they hadn't been separated from one another. And we paid $1.03 for those. They sold for $14.99. Next up was a 2018 Ken Doll front load washing machine. We found that in, I think it was in one of the Houston bins. And the Houston bins had higher prices than the rest of the bins in Texas, but they did also have good stuff. We had paid $2.48 for that, and it sold for $18.38. Next up was a 2011 Hot Wheels pullback slingshot style manual launcher. And I mentioned in last week's video that Hot Wheels launchers, whether they are electronic or manual, always sell for us. And here's another one. So this one we had paid 90 cents for, I think in the Dallas bins, and it sold for $14.99. Next up was a vintage Reed & Barton Thistle silver plate twisted butter knife, and it was very tarnished, and also the blade was bent. But this was a very ornate, nice knife, so we decided to go ahead and list it. It was free to us, so that also helped, and it sold for $11. Next up was a 1986 Garbage Pail Kid card for the character Nasal Hazel. I got this on Mercari using money that I earned from you guys using my affiliate link. So I didn't have any cost for this card. So thank you to anybody who has used my affiliate link. I think the person who most recently used my link was Pre-Loved Trinkets Mart, if I'm remembering that right. So thank you so much for clicking on my link. It is always appreciated anytime any of you guys click on any of my links that are in the description box below. But specifically Mercari, the way that works is that when you guys click on the link, it gives you an immediate $10 in Mercari money that you can spend on the app, just on anything that you want to. And a hot tip, a hot take on that one is I try to go in and sort items by free shipping, because then it really maximizes how I can apply that money and means less money out of my pocket. And then after you sell $100 on Mercari of items that you're reselling, or, just items from around your house. Once you've sold $100 of items on Mercari, you get an additional $20 to spend on the Mercari app. So that's $30 that you can get to spend on Mercari just by clicking my link. And it also helps me out as well. And I always try to use that money to purchase things from other resellers on the Mercari app that we can then also resell. So, I try to keep the love going. But I really do appreciate you guys using any of my affiliate links that are all in the description box below. And really, I just appreciate you guys watching my channel. It still surprises me that anybody watches this channel and subscribes to us and hits the like button. So all of it is just very much appreciated. Okay, moving on. The next item that sold was a gold tone and black enamel elephant brooch. I do try to pick up a lot of brooches, but mostly brooches if they're in the shape of like a holiday item or an animal. Those tend to be specifically popular. So I got this at a garage sale for 50 cents and it sold for $11.98. All right, next up was a lot of 14 dollhouse miniature or Barbie sized beverages. It was just a variety of items that we had collected from multiple different locations. Most of them actually were Nina's, were my daughter's that she used to play with. So I have the cost as 0 on the spreadsheet. And these sold for $12. Next up was a vintage 1999 Salvino Bammers green plush Vinnie Testaverde bear. This was in the style of a Beanie Baby, but it was, the brand was Salvino Bammers, and it was new with tags. Kevin found this at a garage sale for $1, and it sold for $8.99 on Etsy. Next up was a vintage magazine that was on the topic of electronics, and it was called Nuts and Bolts. This came out of a box of magazines that I got that were mostly woodworking magazines, and this one was kind of a rogue item that was in there, so we decided to list it separately. I had paid 38 cents for this in that big lot, and it sold for $12.99. Next up was a vintage 1994 Easy Grader test grading tool chart. It was one of those things where like you slide it out, and depending on the number of questions on the test, it would give you the different grade depending on how many tests. I am not explaining this well, but I think you guys know what I mean. Like depending on how many questions they missed and how many total questions there were, it would give you the grade that they would have gotten. So I found this at a garage sale for 25 cents, and it sold for $10.36 on Etsy. Next up was a vintage Kirby Classic 3 red vacuum cleaner, lot of attachments and accessories, and it included an original Kirby box. It was incomplete. We didn't have every attachment that was supposed to go with it. We found this at the thrift store for $2.70, and it sold for $39.54. And we sell a lot of vacuum cleaner attachment parts and pieces, even modern ones, vintage one, Kirby, rainbow vacuum cleaner is one you want to be on the lookout for. But people people buy vacuum cleaner parts. All right, next up was a very surprising sale. Y'all are going to be shocked by this one. This was a lot of 3. The brand was Old River Road, and I figured this out through Google Lens because these cookie cutters were not marked in any way. But they were big cookie cutters. Each one of them were like 6 to 7 inches a piece, and they were copper. And I picked them up at the thrift store in a bag of cookie cutters, and I picked them up because they were copper. I did not know what they were. I did not know that they had this much value, but I did know that copper cookie cutters tend to be valuable. So I took the risk. I paid $3.24 for these at the thrift store, identified them through Google Lens, and was blown away when they sold for $50. That was a good one. And we got positive feedback on that recently. Next up was a Mattel Teresa doll, who is a friend of Barbie, and it was just some of her clothing. This was a Native American dress and headpiece. And oddly, I had this headpiece and couldn't identify it. And then out of another batch of Barbie items that I got at a different time from a different person, I found the matching dress, and I was like, that looks familiar. So that was pretty cool. And I had no cost on that because they were gifted to me. That lot sold for $15.18. Okay, next up was a vintage 1992 Ruth's Amish doll. This was a little rag doll, signed and dated, and it was named Mel. It had the original tag on it and everything, but it had obviously been used and displayed for a long time. So we found this in, I think, the San Antonio bins, maybe. We paid $2.02 for this. It sold for $16.99. But this is where some of our problems began. We have had a lot of issues this quarter, specifically with the USPS and delayed deliveries. They are just taking their sweet time with a lot of our deliveries, and it's been causing us a lot of headaches. Like, I have been expending way too much emotional energy on USPS late deliveries this quarter. So on this item, we received a message from the buyer, basically saying, where's my item? And then like 2 minutes later, they opened an item not received case. So they did reach out to us first, but really reached out to us with no intention of allowing us to resolve it before opening the item not received case. And when I hear from a buyer asking, where is my item, and there is a reason why they're asking that, it's not just them being, ridiculous. My next step is to typically file a missing mail search using the USPS.com website, and doing that is really easy. You go on there, and I think it's in the help section. You have to enter the tracking number and some information about the package. And at that point, I don't know what it does, but it does some magic behind the USPS curtain and usually gives the package a little nudge. And typically, not always, but typically the tracking will pick back up on the item after a few days and get it moving. And that's what happened on this item. But this one was kind of scary because once a buyer opens an item not received case, you are on a deadline. There are like 4 or 5 days that you have to resolve the case with the buyer before eBay steps in. And if that item has not been received by the buyer and marked as delivered by USPS tracking, what will happen and what eBay can do is close that case in favor of the buyer. And the way that what they do is they take the money out of your account. So they would take the money out of my account, give it back to the buyer, and basically I would get like a defect on my account also for having an item not received. And so we were coming up on that deadline. I don't remember what date it was exactly, but let's just, say for the sake of argument, the deadline for me having to have this case closed was like December 10th or something. And I had to make sure that the buyer had the item in hand by December 10th or give the buyer a full refund, resolve it with the buyer basically by December 10th. And I knew that item had picked back up tracking and was on their way to the buyer. So I was like checking every day, seeing where the tracking was. And I knew that it was going to be like a real squeaker whether or not the buyer was going to get that item by the deadline of when they could ask eBay to step in and close the case. And on the day that they could close the case, which that morning they could have closed the case at any time that day, December 10th, for the sake of argument, it stated on the tracking that it was going to be delivered at like 8:30 p.m. that night. So I was like, oh, great. You know, this could be like a horrible crossover of time, you know? So I messaged the buyer and I said, great news. It looks like your item is going to be delivered at 8:30 p.m. tonight. Once you receive the item and have had a chance to inspect it, please go in and close the eBay item not received case so that eBay will know that your item is received. Thank you so much for your patience. Never heard back from the buyer. They did not respond to me. I watched all day. They never asked eBay to step in and resolve the case. And then earlier than 8:30, I don't remember exactly what time, but their item was delivered. Never heard back from them at that point. But once the item was marked as delivered, eBay did step in and close the case in my favor. So it ended up working out, but had that gone a little bit differently, had I been forced to resolve that case the day before, eBay would have stepped in, taken the money out of my account, and closed it in favor of the buyer. And I would have lost that money, and I also would have had no recourse to file an insurance claim with USPS and get that money back. So there's a flaw in the system there. And I think eBay needs an option for sellers in a situation where they would have closed the case in the favor of the buyer, where I could go back in and open another case later showing that the item was delivered and get my money back, I guess. I don't know. What do you guys think? What's the solution for that? Or should I have been able to go in there and say that still tracking, the item is still tracking, and here's the proof, and ask for an extension of that case? But there needs to be a better solution for that, because I feel like that could have really gone badly. And what if that had been like a, $250 item? I mean, this was only $16.99, so not that big of a deal, but there are many scenarios there where that could have gone really horribly wrong. So bear that in mind, because there are some other sales coming up here where we have experienced some similar things, and there's definitely a trend with USPS this year. Okay, so next up was a kid size Air Jordan Jumpman hoodie. We found this in one of the Houston bins for $2.03, and it sold for $29.99. Next up was an Ikea pillow, and it was brand new in the package. We found this in maybe the Dallas bins, I can't remember, but actually I think the Fort Worth bins. Fort Worth bins for $1.10, and it sold for $15.18. Next up was, to me, a really surprising sale, because this item to me, like, I would have walked right past it at a garage sale or an estate sale. I would have never known that this had any value. This was a 9-inch Czechoslovakian frosted glass flower vase, and it had like embossed birds and clouds on it. It was pretty, but to me, it didn't seem like something special. But apparently, if it's marked Czechoslovakian on the bottom and it's a vase that looks like this, it's worth picking up. So this was free to us. It was given to us, and it sold for $70. So that was a good one. Next up was a purple waffle knit casual hooded jacket by the brand Focus. This was also gifted to us, and it sold for $18.38. Next up was a 2006 Dandy Happy Valentine's Day 20-inch Sweetheart teddy bear. We found this at the thrift store for $2.17, and it sold for $22.94. And next up was a 1990 Dandy 20-inch plush holiday Christmas teddy bear. And we got this at the thrift store for $1.35, and it sold on Etsy for $30.93. And unfortunately, this item was lost in shipping. The buyer reached out to us and said, I have not gotten my item yet. I want a replacement. Well, this was a single item. We did not have any more. We responded back and said, I'm so sorry. We don't have any more items. However, we'll file a missing mail search. So we did that, and I felt very confident that the tracking would pick back up, but after a full week, it didn't. I did reach back out to the buyer in the meantime and said, we're keeping our eye on it. If we don't have any movement on the tracking by X date, we will go ahead and issue a full refund. I'm so sorry. And at that point, she reached out to us on the deadline date, I think it was, and said, I still haven't gotten the item. There's been no movement on the tracking. And at that point, we, apologized and said, I'm so sorry. It appears that your item has been lost in the mail, and we have issued a full refund. We refunded their full payment, including shipping, their purchase price, everything, of course. And they were very disappointed, and they made that very clear. She was so disappointed, I think is exactly what she said. And I just responded back with, I'm terribly sorry. Once it is out of our hands and in the hands of the post office, it's out of our control. So I did file a claim on this item with the post office, and I'm waiting to hear back on whether or not we will get our money back on this. There was an item that was in a previous What Sold video that we had sold, and at the time that we recorded the What Sold video, we did not know that the buyer had not received the item, so we didn't mention this in the What Sold video, but it was a blue wall plaque, and that item was also reported as not received. And I filed a missing mail search on that item as well. This was sold through eBay. After several days, the tracking did not pick back up, and we ultimately had to refund her money, and we filed a claim on USPS.com because all Ground Advantage mail and Priority mail is insured up to, I think Ground Advantage is insured up to $50, and I can't remember how much Priority is insured up to, but you get that free with your USPS postage purchase. So just a side note on that, take advantage of that if you ever need to. And since the tracking never picked back up on that blue plaque, we actually received a check in the mail from USPS the other day for the full amount of the original shipping and the cost of the item on that blue plaque. So I have a check sitting on my desk in there for a little over $21. So we did get the USPS to cut us a check, but now we have had to file a second claim on that teddy bear, and that one's still pending. And there's another item that we're dealing with right now too. A buyer reached out to us and said that they did not have their toner cartridge that they had ordered. And when I checked that tracking, I was like, ooh, this looks bad, because it just said nothing. It said that and the way he worded it was, it looks like you never took it to the post office. And honestly, he's right. That's what it looked like, because it looked like we had created the shipping label and then there was no more tracking after that. But here's the thing. Literally every single one of these issues that I've told you with, the blue plaque, the teddy bear, the Amish doll, and this toner cartridge, they were all shipped on the same day. They all went out with the same batch of items that were all picked up by the same day. And I know it was not our regular mail carrier, Roy, because he's fantastic. And I think it was when he was out of town and we had a substitute mail carrier. And I don't know what happened with those packages, if something happened to the truck that day, if they lost an entire truckload worth of packages and they got rerouted to the wrong place and lost, but these are all from that same batch, and we have had ongoing issues with it. So I filed a missing mail search on that toner cartridge. I reassured the guy and told him that, we were working on it. I assured him that we had made sure that it got shipped out, that this was a tracking issue, not with a shipping issue. He was very nice. He has not caused us any further problems. Once I filed that missing mail search, the tracking picked back up. So after, it did take like 5 days though. So I messaged the guy back and I said, great news. It looks like your item has picked back up tracking and it's in El Paso, Texas. It looks like it's on the way to you. We really appreciate your patience. I have not heard back from him, but sometimes not hearing back from people is a good thing because you don't want to hear back something bad. So hopefully it will make it to him. But you guys, the USPS is killing me this quarter. I am expending way too much mental energy worrying about whether or not my packages are getting there, and we are having some unhappy buyers on multiple platforms because of delays with USPS. So let me know, are you experiencing the same thing? What are the steps that you take to combat this? And what do you think eBay could do to help combat the issue of that crossover period where sellers could really end up getting screwed over by having to refund a buyer and then the item would get ultimately delivered? Let me know. Okay, moving on. We still have a few other items in this what sold. So next up was a 2017 Mattel Handemonium Tiny Hands game. If you have ever seen Saturday Night Live and Kristen Wiig, they do that skit where it's like the Lawrence Welk show and she's the sister with the tiny hands and she's popping the bubbles. So that's what this is. And I guarantee you that somebody is buying this game for the hands, not for the actual game. But this game has a really good sell-through rate. So if you ever see it and it's complete, it would be worth picking up. We got it for free. It was gifted to us and it sold for $27. Okay, next up was an item that we got when we purchased all of the mystery boxes on Facebook Marketplace just for a fun, entertaining experiment. So if you want to check out that video, I'll link it in the description box below. This was a funny gag gift and it was a toilet timer. It said, "Don't be a throne warmer." This was purchased from a Facebook Marketplace mystery box. Our per item cost from this box was a lot. It was $10.28. And this gag gift only sold for $11.99. So we lost money on this one, but surprisingly, we actually made money on a lot of these mystery box items. So I don't know, who would have thought? All right, next up was a cheerleading skirt by the brand Chasse, and it was brand new with tags. We found it in one of the Houston bins for $1.73, and it sold for $20 even. Next up was a rainbow handmade Afghan or blanket. We found this in, I think, the Waco bins for $2, and it sold for $31.98. Next up was a 1932 paperback book called Building Health, The Truth in Plain English. He's going to give it to you straight. We got this at an estate sale for $1.08, and it sold for $30 even. Next up was a vintage C.R. Gibson address book. It was unused. It was not brand new, like, you know, it has some shelfware and stuff, but it didn't have any addresses written in it. We found this at the thrift store for 35 cents, and it sold for $10 even. Next up was a yellow ceramic deviled egg dish and the matching salt and pepper shakers, which were in the shapes of chickens. This was gifted to us to sell, and it sold for $42.99 on Etsy. Next up was a 1993 Barbie Horse. It was supposed to like walk. It was electronic and it was supposed to walk, but he had a broken leg and he kept falling down. I did not know it was broken when I found it in the Fort Worth bins, and I was so sad when he was broken, but he still sold. We paid $2.26 for it, and it sold for $14.18. Next up was the speaker that went with that spirit box. So the haunted speaker. This came from that garage sale. I put it on our spreadsheet at $1, and it sold for $15. Next up was a cassette called Nilsson Sings Newman. It was Harry Nilsson singing Randy Newman songs. And we found that at the thrift store for 13 cents. It sold for $11.98. Next up was that Epson toner cartridge I was just telling you guys about that we're having the delivery issue on. So I'm actually going to check it right now and see if it got delivered to that guy. Nope. Not yet. Let's see what the tracking says. So we shipped this on December 6th. Today is December 21st. You guys, he has been very patiently waiting. Here's what the tracking says. I'm going to screenshot this for you. It was sent on December 6th. December 16th, I initiated the missing mail search. December 19th, it arrived at the El Paso Distribution Center. December 19th, it departed the El Paso Distribution Center. December 20th, in transit to next facility, arriving late. December 21st, in transit to next facility, arriving late. You guys, I'm probably going to have to give this poor guy a refund. That's not good. So that's where we are with that. Okay, so next up was a pair of my old jogger pants by the brand So, and those sold for $18.38. Next up was a Black & Decker Firestorm Charger and 2 batteries. I think this was for like a drill. These were gifted to us and they sold for $39.99. Next up was a lot of 6 plastic candle wax drip catchers, and they had a starburst pattern on them. They were mid-century modern. These were gifted to us to sell and they sold for $12.99. Next up was some of the vintage hose. We got a big bag of vintage hosiery, and these were Park Lane hosiery, and they were like old school stockings that you have to wear with a girdle. They were new in the box and they were gifted to us. They sold for $27.99. Next up was a men's brown, red, and navy 100% cashmere scarf. It was marked Scotland, but it didn't have a specific brand. We got that at a garage sale for just 50 cents, and it sold for $25 even. Next up was a Disney Tsum Tsum with lights and sounds, and it was of Jack Skellington from The Nightmare Before Christmas. It was brand new in the box. We got that at a thrift store for $3.23, and it sold for $15.98. Next up was an 8.5-inch Christmas LED color changing lights Angel. We had the box that went with it, but the box was kind of damaged. This came from the Facebook Marketplace mystery boxes. We paid $6.31 for it, and this sold for $19.98. So see, we made money on this one. Next up was an orange ScoobyDoo Halloween jack-o'-lantern light-up blow mold. We got this from the garage sale where we got the spirit box. They were a spooky bunch. We paid $2 for it, and it sold for $49.97. Next up was a vintage lot of 5 Nancy Drew hardcover books from the 1930s and 40s. We got these at the North Austin Goodwill bins. We paid $3.44, and they sold for $49.99. Next up was a Nordic ware cakelet pan in the shape of gingerbread kids. We found that at a garage sale for $3, and it sold for $22.99. And last up was a Facebook Marketplace local pickup sale. This was a steam fast white full-size clothing steamer. This is a great thing to have as a reseller. We actually already have one that we purchased at a garage sale. So this one was gifted to us, and it sold for $20 even on Facebook Marketplace. So that wraps up all of our sales for the week of December 1st through 7th. Let's go over the totals. This week we sold 55 items for an average sale price of $25.31. Our sales totaled $1,391.96, and that made for a net profit of $731.90. And Kevin would be very pleased because we met our $100 a day goal. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please let me and YouTube know by hitting the like button. Make sure that you're subscribed if you're not already. That lets me know that I'm doing a good job and lets YouTube know that this is content that other people might enjoy. Let me know if you guys are having issues with USPS too and what you're doing to combat it, and I will catch you on the flip side.